And welcome to STOked, the ultimate Star Trek online podcast. My name is Chris. This episode is brought to you by GOG.com. You can save 10% in the month of February when you buy 2 or more titles. And I want to say good morning to the live stream over at jblive.tv. Hey there, live stream. Look at you guys go. Yeah, we got a big crowd today because, of course, it's another featured episode weekend. And I'll give you my review. And I thought this week I'm going to set out to try to review it to see, does this game add more Star Trekkiness to STO? Now, do you know what I mean when I say Star Trekkiness? Because I barely do. But here's kind of how I picture it. I think Star Trek fans are willing to overlook a lot of things. I mean, just look at the original series, right? A lot of people now who watch the original series, there's some camp to it that you have to overcome. Or look at Star Trek, the 25th anniversary, one of my favorite video games of all time, but by today's standards, there's some issues with it. Star Trek fans just love Star Trek. And so I thought, before I even played this week's mission, I would try to review it from that perspective. Does this add more Star Trek to STO? Because that seems to be one of the most important elements that STO is going to need to be a long-term success as a Star Trek franchise, and to bring in free-to-play Star Trek fans. You got to add more and more Star Trek all the time, and up it so it becomes the ultimate living Star Trek universe. It's a big task, but you can accomplish it by incrementally adding things that make it more Star Trek as you go. And so I'll look in tactical view in this later on in this week's episode with that lens to see if it met those requirements. So stay tuned for that. Also, towards the end of the show, we've got a new community feedback with a new community poll that I'm going to give out to you guys. That is a little Deep Space Nine trivia question. I'll be curious to see how many of you get this one right. But first, I thought we'd talk about a little bit of news. I accidentally showed the screen there just for a second at the intro. That's my news docket. The first story, the top story that I have on Stoke's news docket for this week.
Daniel Stahl says stuff. Update.
The return of Derek Stahl. Wait, Dimitri Stanley. No. Oh, that's right. It's Daniel Stahl. Dan Stahl is now returned as the executive producer of Star Trek Online. Now, some of you might remember from last week, I teased Al and asked if he was the rumored EP, but he didn't share a peep about Dan Stahl. He must have known by that point. But so now the announcement's been made. I've already put contacts out with Cryptic to get him on the show, so expect to have Dan Stahl on the show in the next couple of episodes. And, of course, feel free to send your questions in to STOked@JupiterBroadcasting.com or leave a comment wherever you watch this episode. I'll be collecting some of those for my chat with Dan. Yeah, there's Captain Gecko, Al, in the chat room right there. He's totally admitting to it. That's all right, Al. I understand. You can't share with the Chris Man when you're on air. So that's kind of a big story, and I think a lot of us have questions about Dan's return. Are we going to see the return of engineering reports? Will we see things like Ask Cryptic's return? Will we not? Have they just decided those didn't play well, and so now they're not going in those directions, even though Dan's back? Those are some of the questions I have, and I'm sure a lot of the questions that you guys have. So I'll be thinking of those, and also send yours into STOked@JupiterBroadcasting.com. All right. Let's talk about my new favorite addition that came this week before we get into our tactical view segment, and that would have to be the DS9 C-Store bundle. And I've sort of pulled back from talking about C-Store stuff on the show just a little bit because I know it's sort of a touchy area with some of you, but I figure I'll talk about the stuff that really impresses me. And this DS9 pack is one of them. First of all, I got to start with the part I love the most, and that's the new Defiant interior. That's got a great bridge, a crew section, and engineering, and I think engineering is quite possibly my favorite part. I love the bridge, and I love how cramped it feels. And it does look great, but engineering, when I walked through those doors of engineering, man, did that feel right. And the hallways are fantastic. I also kind of got a better appreciation for the actual Defiant. The actual Defiant from the mission, one of the things that always bothered me is it seemed like whenever you saw a sickbay scene, it just looked like a redress of the lounge scene or whatever, the lunchroom scene, whatever set you want to call that. I always felt like they were just redressing. But one of the things Cryptic did is they actually laid out the rooms, and you come to realize you're just running along that side of the ship. So that's what they all would look like because all of those rooms are along the side. I actually thought that was pretty nice little layout. It gave me a better understanding of the actual ship from the movie. This ship also came with a little shuttle pad, like a Type 10 shuttle, I believe. I'll be honest, that didn't seal the deal for me. I've already got my captain's yacht, I've already got a Delta Flyer, I've already got a regular shuttle, plus I just got a Cardi drop box from the last featured episode, which also gave me a runabout. So portable ships and all, and plus I'm gonna get that. I know when that new flagship enters the sea store, I know I'm gonna get that, and it's gonna come with an auxiliary craft as well. So I'm not totally thrilled with the auxiliary craft thing, but they're fun, and it also comes with a pet that you can use. You also got some new uniforms, a DS9 Admiral's uniform, which is the one I'm rocking currently, and also a few Bajoran outfits that you could wear, I suppose. I probably wouldn't. One of the things, though, that I noticed slipped a lot of people's radars from last week's featured episodes is we are getting Ketracel White drops. You might have noticed that. Well, if you have a Tribble in your inventory, and he's probably a hungry Tribble, he could eat that Ketracel White. Well, let's just call it the Ketracel Tribble, I guess, and it helps you defend against Dominion attackers. It probably gives you a Polaron resistance or something. I'm not sure. I actually literally just found out about it, so I wanted to relay it to you guys just in case you hadn't heard about it. So if you've got a little Ketracel White, which you only get, as far as I've seen, on that weekly episode, you have to go back and replay it to get some. Be sure to stick a Tribble in your inventory. Any Tribble will do. It can be an existing Tribble you have, like your Borg Tribble or something like that. It'll eat it up, and then where the Ketracel White was in your inventory, boom! Boom! New Tribble. Now, before we get to Tactical View, I want to tell you about this week's sponsor. I am thrilled to have a sponsor on STOked, and I would really appreciate it if you guys said thank you to them for sponsoring this show, because it is awesome to get paid to do a show about Star Trek Online. Our sponsor this week is GOG.com, a great source for classic video games. They're the online game distributor with a difference, and I have 2 picks for you this week because GOG.com is doing a 10% off in the month of February when you buy 2 or more games, and I know you guys love space games, so I've got 2 games I want to recommend. The first one is Free Space, and Free Space plus its expansion. This game originally came out in 1998, and there is no closer version of actual space combat that you will find in this century. This game is the benchmark for space combat. It is so much fun, and it also has a lot of great little play elements that were really advanced for its time that still hold up today. So Free Space, and because if you pick 2 games, you get 10% off, I'm also recommending Free Space 2. Both of these games are so super cheap over at GOG.com, and one of the excellent standout things about GOG.com is every game is DRM free for a great price. With that 10% off deal, you get this for like $11 total. You get both these games, and Free Space 2 took Free Space, where the Great War started, and brings it even further. It's more immersive. It's even more awesome. The graphics are up another notch. There is no better space combat out there. I mean, if you just want to do some dogfights, you gotta check out Free Space. It is so much fun, and the great thing is because it was originally written back in the day, but GOG.com has spruced it all up. They have it packaged together real great. It's so easy to run on your machine. Plus, you get extras like an HD wallpaper and the in-game soundtrack when you buy it over at GOG.com. Thank you to GOG.com for sponsoring STOked, and I'd like to recommend that all of you check out GOG.com on Twitter as well. They're just GOG.com, one word on Twitter, and you can say thanks for sponsoring STOked and Jupiter Broadcasting. All right, now let's get into Tactical View. Welcome to Tactical View. So this week's episode was a little different than something we've seen before, and based on the reactions I was seeing from the chat room, a little bit different than what a lot of people expected, but maybe not all that unwelcome. It wasn't high combat, it wasn't high adrenaline mission, but it definitely added a new area in a big way to the game, an area that's full of a lot of different things, a lot of things that we'll be able to do for a long time. And as far as my original benchmark, did it add more Trek to the game? Well, let's reflect on that for a minute. Let's talk about some of the things that I thought were interesting. First of all, just from a pure gameplay standpoint, the choice now where we had multiple different missions you could pick, like one of my favorites was picking between fighting the Jemadar or fighting a changeling in the holodeck. And then you go into the holodeck engages, and there's this really a quick, fun battle with the changeling. And I liked the whole element of having different options because it immediately makes me want to come back right away and play again to try the different stuff that I didn't get a chance to do. So adding replayable content to the game that I'm already compelled to do, that is a win-win. It's a featured episode, and it adds replayable content to the game. That's a stroke of genius, really, because it's killing 2 birds with 1 stone. 2 really important birds with 1 really accurate stone. So that's good. I also I found the voting dialogue in group gameplay much more compelling in this episode than it was in the last one. I can't actually put my finger on what was different about the implementation or if I just understood it and so I knew how it worked. But during the moment where you have to go talk down some Bajoran protesters, I honestly had a blast picking the different dialogue options, assuming how Bajorans would say something and pretending like I'm stroking Bajoran ego and then finding out that actually wasn't the correct answer. And I loved the balance between inciting a protest and also then talking the people down. And we got to the point where we had one more opportunity to screw up or one more opportunity to win. And I'll be honest, with that countdown going and having a full team, that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that. I would say, I don't know how well it would play single player, so I'll reserve my judgment for that. I'll come back and try it by myself to see if it was quite as compelling. But in a group, with the voting mechanisms for which one you want to go with, and having TeamSpeak to chat about them, and as the timer got closer, I definitely found it compelling. But I would say my favorite part of the mission was the end cutscene. And once again, it stars the J-Man as Kurland, and you're talking with the Vorta on Deep Space Nine, trying to talk her down. And to my surprise, the cutscene stops in the middle and gives you, the player, multiple choices. Basically, Kurland turns to you and says, "Hey, I could use a suggestion here." That, I think, is the first time we've ever seen anything like that. And I can't wait to go back and try different variations to see if I see different cutscenes. The cutscenes themselves were great. I love the cutscene of all of the ambassadors or all the different figureheads at the table at Deep Space Nine coming to the resolution of the Dominion War. I liked her stepping down and the music amped up. The only thing I would have liked to see a little bit different about those cutscenes is seeing some Jemadar stationed at the Deep Space Nine ops stations, because it seemed like she was just on ops all by herself. But does this add more Trek to STO? I'd say yes. In fact, I'd say maybe more so than almost any featured episode we've done before. And in some regards, to the expense of some thrilling gameplay, I would add. There was really, unless you went and shot some Jemadar or a Changeling or got in a bar fight, there was very little in the way of combat and adrenaline in this mission. But at the same time, it's a lot of background about the Bajorans, love or hate them, and there's additional things like books you can go read. There's a lot of things that have been added that give backstory. Also, I really dig the whole investigation, overall arching timeline or story that was in this mission. Getting contact with Deep Space Nine, making contact with somebody at Ops, or making contact with somebody in the bar, getting information, finding out that the Dominion themselves don't even realize that it's in the future now. They think they're still fighting the Dominion War. And then having that evolve and all of the interesting tidbits that came out that were a payoff in that final cutscene that you learned throughout the entire mission, that you were just sort of picking up as you went around. And in reality, this now all of this is this. We're seeing Bajor, I would say, in a more stylistic and in a more modernized way than we have ever seen Bajor on Star Trek. In Deep Space Nine and in TNG, we always saw Bajor as these refugee camps or these gardens or these big temples. But we never got to see like downtown Bajor City X. And we never got a feel for what that looks like. And you always hear how beautiful Bajor is and how great Bajor's resources are and on about all of that. But this map really drove it home. And now it's a map we always have available. It's a social zone that has your regular social things you expect and some great gameplay elements. I'd say, as far as does this game add more Trek to STO, this is probably the biggest addition we've seen yet. I polled the chat room on this same question, and they all pretty much were in agreement with me that it really does add something to the overall long-term aspect of the game. And that's a pretty big win. But I gotta say, my appetite is whetted for combat. After the first episode, where there's just a little bit of combat while you're escaping Deep Space Nine, and especially after this episode, I'm ready to get in a fight. But this is a 5-episode arc, so they could just be building up. And I think about that, and in retrospect, could be leading to something a lot of fun, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though, so leave a comment wherever you watch this episode, and what did you think of it? If you thought maybe this wasn't that great of a mission, I'd like to hear your thoughts and why. I'll be reading some of those and sort of formulating my thoughts for my next review and working all of those in. So all of that stuff I sort of incorporate, and then I sort of change my approach in each tactical view. But really, I think overall, even though it's Bajor, it's darn good to look at. All right, let's get into community feedback.
Right.
And welcome to Community Feedback. Boy, it's been a while since we've done one of these. Welcome back to the show, Mav.
Thanks for having me back on, Chris. I appreciate it.
No, dude, you bet. So I've got a new poll question for the audience that I'll give out at the end of Community Feedback. But we have a couple of questions that have been percolating around in the community that you thought it would be good to come on and address. And I know what at least one of them is pertaining to STFs, but what do you got?
Well, there's been a lot of emails I've been getting, with the time off and everything. And, I appreciate all the emails, all the support for bringing the show back. I am glad to be back. I'm not going to be able to touch on all the different little ones, but I am going to touch up on a couple of ones that came up repeatedly. One is there's been complaints about random there's a team debugging. Or, I'm sorry.
Dropping bug. There's a team dropping bug, yeah.
You'll be in the middle of an STF, completely random. The team will be disbanded, forcing everybody to leave the team right in the middle of the STF. This involves both KDF and Fed players. And even when they come back up, you can't be re-invited, causing a split team, and half the people can't complete the objective as they need to, or can't complete the mission.
That's killer to have it happen during an STF.
Right. And then, say if you're with a group that you're going to be doing it, that you're doing a whole bunch of runs back to back, it screws up the reset timers and everything like that. So if you are having this problem and you're noticing it happens, say during a particular point in any mission, or if it is just happening randomly, please give us an email. Let us know if you have any screenshots about when this happens, like a before and after. Just kind of take a picture of your team just as you enter the STF, and then kind of a timestamp of when it happens to you, if it happens to you. So this way we can submit it to the devs like we have in the past with some of our nice findings. And maybe they can figure out why it keeps auto de-teaming people. Maybe it's just a glitch. Yeah. Maybe it's just a packet thing. Who knows?
That'd be a great one to clear up, because that's a killer on the STFs. A killer.
Here's the big one that people have been complaining about.
Okay.
Prototype loot drops for the Mark 12.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it seems that either the loot tables have changed to the point where they're not dropping at all, or they've become even more rare and impossible to get. Understanding that the players know out there that, if you want the good loot, you got to be willing to grind it. But some of them are now going, they haven't seen it in 13, 14, 15, 20 runs. They haven't seen a drop.
Yeah.
So they're trying to figure out.
That's pretty elite.
They've come to us to hopefully get the message out, and maybe one of the devs are listening. Can we look into the loot table, look into the drops, see what's going on? Is it working as intended? Is it not working as intended? See if we can, I don't want to say speed it up, but people are saying it's been nerfed so bad that it's ruining people's playtime, because they're playing for hours and hours and grinding and not getting anything for it, or they're getting all the lower level stuff. None of the Mark 12 stuff seems to be dropping like it used to.
And we have some members like Silver Wings in the Jupiter Force fleet, and they play STFs all the time, constantly. So, they have a pretty good beat on the drop rate. It's not like they play once a week and just get bummed when they don't get a drop. They play at least once a day. Right. At least. So that's significant if you play that often and you're still not getting drops. And I've seen a lot of different suggestions on how people could fix this, maybe by doing some sort of exchange or something like that. I'd be curious to know what people's ideas are, because the whole point of the STF is it's supposed to be hard to get that gear. That gear is supposed to be the best stuff in the game, and it's supposed to be the hardest to get. So you don't want to make it too easy. So I'm kind of curious what people's thoughts out there are, or if there might be a different approach entirely. I'll be honest with you, Mav. I really don't like the vendor system for the STFs. I find it clunky. And I totally respect and appreciate what they're trying to do, and I think it's better than what it used to be, but it's still a form of currency. It's a separate form of currency, and it's a separate form of vendors that I have to go through. And the menu trees when you want to go to space or ground combat and what iteration of that gear you want are kind of confusing, and they honestly, they kind of put me off. Between the low drop rate and the confusing vendor tree system, I honestly just avoid grinding the STFs. Yeah. If those kind of things were changed a little bit, I think I'd be more encouraged to play them.
I agree, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not a grinder. I barely started doing dilithium grinding for the dailies and stuff like that recently. I don't really play the dilithium market, as much as I'm a lifetimer and a casual player. It's just one of those things where I'm just not interested in dealing with having to repeat, and maybe this is my downfall as a STOked player. I am not into the heavy duty grind. You will not see me do the same thing over and over and over and over again just to be the most topped out, decked out guy. I'm also not a PvPer, so maybe this affects PvPers more than it does PvEers. I don't know. I'd like to hear your opinions as well. Is this loot table, is this imbalance, or the deteaming thing also affecting the PvPers? You know, the last time I heard from you guys was when you guys helped me out with the exploits episode.
Right.
So I'd like to go out to the community and say, if there's something out there that seems to be grinding your gears, per se.
That really grinds my gears, Mav.
Right. Send me an email. Let me know if it's a bug in game, if it's a mechanic, if is it PvE related, is it PvP related? Here's my grind my gear scenario. I'm new to the Foundry. I just started doing stuff for the Foundry. For the first time, I'm actually starting to try to write an episode. I got a group of guys helping. I've got a group of guys helping me out create something for not only the show but for the fleet.
Yeah.
My first big thing. I'm getting all excited. I'm getting into there. I go to use the ESD map, the pre-made map, and it's got Earth and everything like that, but it has an old silhouette of Earth space dock. And I just kind of pulled the really kind of look. Like, why couldn't you take the nice shiny ESD that's available now?
You mean the old one?
The old one.
Oh, that's almost kind of cool in a sense, though, because I'd love to use that still as a station somewhere.
Right, it's cool in a sense, but when you're trying to get a mission that links to ESD and then goes off to, and I don't want to ruin where I'm going with my mission, but it's like, it would be nice if the real ESD that's currently available was there.
Yeah, I hear you.
So that it would just be a little bit more realistic instead of saying, well, this is Earth space dock, and I should say, you know what, in a time warp circa whatever.
Right.
Then it would make sense. It's just something that kind of irked me, and I guess it's something that some of the Foundry people have been poking at for a while, and it got kind of quiet. Well, I want to bring it back up because I'm trying to do something nice and I can't do it.
So people should send their suggestions to STOked@JupiterBroadcasting.com. That gets to Mav, and then we'll read them on the episode. Is there any other topics you want to cover before we get to the poll this week?
No, I'd like to hear this poll. Let's get it out.
All right. So here's the poll this week is why, and this is a little Star Trek trivia question, why does Deep Space Nine observe a 26-hour day? Go over to the JupiterBroadcasting.com site, find STOked episode 111, and right in the show notes will be the poll embedded. Cast your vote there, and we'll share the results on a future STOked. Now, Mav, we did do a poll a long time ago before the show went on hiatus about how will the game going free to play change for you. Right. And I didn't really jump on covering this one because it was kind of a snore, to be honest with you. Really, the results. 47% said nothing really changes for me, but a solid 16.69% said that they're going to bring their friends with them. And then some actually, an interesting number was 12.24% are actually going to switch to Freeper accounts from their gold accounts. So.
Here's what I noticed as a result of that poll. It was quite interesting. After playing last week's episode and experiencing the crashes and stuff like that from just trying to complete the mission, to me, I think the free-to-play thing's been a great move. To a point, it's seriously increased the server population.
Yeah.
So, to some detriment, obviously, because of the server crashing. I think this week's episode was much more smoother. Some people were complaining, but not as much. And I think increasing the population, increasing the popularity of the game, even with it being free-to-play, is still a good thing for not only Trekkers alike, but those who have been following the Star Trek IP. I've played, and a lot of us have played a lot of different games. You have your favorites, I have mine. I'd never played the 25th. People can shoot me for it, but I loved Final Unity.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, you got to check out the 25th anniversary. That's a great one.
I got to try that one out. I still haven't really played that one.
Yeah.
But it's still, we're all still here. We're all still playing. It's a game we all love to play. And these new developments, these new things that are coming in, some of them we don't like, some of them we do like. But still, keep giving us your ideas. Yeah. We'll get them out there. We'll get them talked about, and we'll make them hot topics. So hopefully we can see some good things come from Star Trek Online.
I'll say my thoughts on the poll after I read that poll. My reflection is this. Could you imagine if you could time travel 5 years ago and tell past Chris that there'd be this Star Trek game available that is this deep in scope that is going to be free? I mean, that Chris would have said, "You're an idiot. That's impossible. Right. Can I have your DeLorean?" That's how the conversation would have gone. And I mean, when you think about it in the context of the Star Trek games we've had in the past, and how they'd always be like $60 or $50, and you'd play them for a few days and you'd be done with them. This is a big change, and that alone is just huge for Star Trek fans. It's huge for the franchise.
I agree. I mean, there's other games out there that's like, well, we had the collectible card game that I played with friends back when I was in my heyday.
Yep.
You know, we used to collect the miniatures from, I think it was Micro Machines, and we created our own D12 board game, you know, just to create a Star Trek-like multiplayer game that a lot of us could enjoy. Yeah, I did it all back in high school, D&D and all that nice jazz. But this is a great move for this particular game. Again, things could always be better, things could always be worse, but it's an ever-developing environment. They're always you can see they're trying to bring new stuff to the table. Last week it was introducing DOF missions into the mission tree. Now we've got missions that have multiple directions, you know, where you can only choose one or the other, which I thought was fantastic. If we could just get all these new things once they're, you know, in the episodes into the Foundry, I can just see a plethora of really great, fantastic missions with these coming in.
Right. Well, when Bajor already is in the Foundry, right?
And I believe Bajor is already in the Foundry, but being able to use these little mission extras.
Yes. Oh, that would be great.
Incredible writing.
Yeah.
I've seen some great talent out there. I've seen some great missions, and I just hope that they keep expanding on it.
Well, there you have it. Mav, I think that's it. I think that's a good spot to end the community feedback segment on in the whole episode 111. Now, Stoked will be back here next Saturday. And I think each week I'm going to take a little bit different approach to reviewing the featured episodes. So keep sending your feedback on the Tactical View segments and what you'd like to see covered. And I'll keep adjusting the segment a little bit more each time. And then, we'll see what we get. And on a couple episodes down the road, we'll have Dan Stahl on. And I believe if everything goes as planned, the J-Man will be on next week. I had planned to have him on this weekend, but he had a very special occasion, so I relieved him of duty so that way he could tend to some lady matters, if you know what I mean. Let's just say some birthdays were involved. I don't want to go any further than that. I was just being a nice guy. So he'll hopefully be on next weekend with all kinds of good info for you guys. All right, everyone. Well, that just about wraps up this week's episode of Stoked. And I want to remind you to say thanks to GOG.com for sponsoring this week's episode of Stoked, because how awesome is it for this guy to make a living to do this show? Kind of crazy, so be sure to say thanks to them for helping support the show. And tune in next week for an all-new episode of Stoked, jblive.tv, 11 a.m. Saturdays to catch it live. In fact, I even went a little live early this week just so that way I could get playing the mission before everybody else got through with it, because, I couldn't wait. So join the stream a little live tomorrow morning, or Saturday morning, and worst case scenario is you get a little cartoons when you do. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. See you next week.